Now let's get into why cardio can be problematic when it comes to losing body fat sustainably and increasing metabolic rate over time. And to understand that, you first need to understand how your body operates and creates energy, right, when you're doing a certain form of activity. Hey, my name is Phil. I'm a metabolism and fat loss coach. And in this podcast, I'm sharing the lessons I've learned coaching more than 100 women in their 30s and 40s lose 4 to 8 kilograms of body fat in just 12 weeks. So to understand that, you can imagine your body using these two fuels. So we have a slow fuel and we have a fast fuel. The slow fuel is also what we call aerobic, which physiologically means your body is using oxygen that you breathe to create energy. And we have the fast fuel, which you can imagine like your body is not using any oxygen to create the energy. So let me explain that real quick. Now, when you need energy very quickly, right? So you're suddenly running up the stairs because you're catching the metro, you're catching the bus, or you're, right, I don't know, right? You need to run over the street because a car is coming that hasn't seen you. Like if you use energy very quickly, you need it very fast, then we're using this, what we call the anaerobic fuel. Also when the intensity is very high, right? Because in that case, your body can only use our fast fuel, right? It's like you're getting a credit from the bank, right? You want money from the bank, and if you want a very fast credit, you want the money very fast, it's usually more expensive. It takes you more. So that's our fast fuel. But we also have the slow fuel, and that's when our body can be more efficient, right? That's when we use oxygen to create the energy, and that physiologically, without getting into the nerdy details today, is more efficient for the body, right? So if you're doing something over a long time, right? You're taking a walk, maybe you're just standing, right? You have like a home office, you're standing desk, you're standing, and that's when your body uses this more efficient fuel. Maybe also going for a run or you're cycling, right? These kind of things are also swimming, something that you're doing steady, like something very steady, and that you're doing for a longer time, like a repetitive motion, is usually something where your body uses this more efficient fuel, this so-called aerobic, or what I just described as the slow fuel. So that's the different fuels that we have. And another thing that's really important to understand is that this fast fuel that I just described, right, that empties our glycogen stores very quickly. So what I said is taking the fast credit is more expensive, as in having energy very quickly, needing energy very quickly is physiologically for you, for your body, very expensive. It's more inefficient. It takes you more energy. Like a fast credit costs you more money over time. And the same thing is true for our bodies. And the way this is more expensive is that it empties your glucose storages quicker. So we have our whole glucose, right? Glucose for the energy, the whole glucose storages in our muscles and in our liver. That's also what we call the glycogen storages. And these are emptied very quickly when you're using this fast fuel, right? When you need to do something sudden, something high intense, something abrupt. And that's what we call inefficient because it takes us more energy compared to the slow fuel. So now you're probably wondering why the efficiency is such a problem. So if our body is producing energy in an efficient way when doing cardio, why is that an issue? And I'll tell you why. So if our body is efficient, right, because it's the aerobic and the slow fuel, right, because it's something steady, repetitive, and slow-ish, then what this will lead to is our bodies are using the oxygen. It makes it more efficient to create the energy. But if you want to lose body fat, then the efficiency is a problem because our bodies won't burn that much fuel and won't burn that many calories in a certain amount of time. So what we need to do as a result of that is we need to make the session longer. If the cardio is efficient because it's low-ish intensity, because you're not running super fast, but you're doing something slow to medium paced over a long time, then we need to go longer to burn a significant amount of calories so that you're losing body fat, calorie deficit, and so on. And that's the problem because we also know that when a session takes more than 45, 50, 60 minutes, that's like roughly when your cortisol rises. That's of course not black and white. We know statistically strength training, for example, when your session takes you more than 60 minutes, it leads to increased cortisol levels that if you're super stressed already, right, you're not sleeping well, you have like a demanding job and so on, and you have all of these things on your plate, then this might happen faster. Or if you're a woman, this happens faster than for a man, for example, because you're stressed sooner when it comes to that physiologically. And that leads to you having this increased in cortisol levels as an issue as a result of you doing these long cardio sessions. So you going to your HIIT class, to your 60-minute Zumba class, Pilates class, depending on how long that is, that might be increasing your cortisol levels. And we all know, right? Chronically elevated cortisol statistically increases anxiety, worsens sleep, leads to more belly fat, leads to more food cravings. So it has the complete opposite effect of what you wanted it to have, actually. And the same thing, what I mentioned earlier, these long sessions are just inefficient time-wise, right? So for your body, it's efficient to produce the energy, which is not good from a fat loss perspective. You're making up for that by doing a long session, but then first thing you can't do anymore because you had a busy week or you're traveling is your 60-minute cardio session, of course. And at the same time, after your session, you're exhausted, you're tired, you will have more cravings. You will crave more comfort foods, which goes hand in hand with the increase in cortisol levels, of course. So this is just a number of reasons why cardio is not so efficient. Another thing that's actually problematic is that we know that this aerobic kind of training, which does, for example, improve our lung capacity, right, or aerobic performance, or VO2 max in like sports science terms, is not something super sustainable. So an increase in VO2 max actually doesn't have this long-term effect, right? For example, when increasing muscle mass with strength training or doing interval training, like high-intensity interval training, actual high intensity interval training, this has this long-term effect. And even when we're not doing it for 3 months, we're coming back quite quickly. We can build back up that muscle mass quite quickly. So it's a very nice long-term compound effect that this has, this kind of strength and interval training. For cardio, that's not the case. We're dropping our lung capacity quite quickly and it takes us longer to get it back. That's another thing that makes that less efficient amongst the other things I already mentioned before. So now I talked a lot about what doesn't work. Let's now talk about what does. And that is interval training. And I'm talking HIIT, high intensity interval training. And I'm also walking you through what that really means, because if you're asking me, it's the most misunderstood term in the industry of fitness. It's massively misunderstood, and I'll walk you through why that is. So what the important thing with high intensity interval training is that you're actually accessing high intensities. And it seems so simple, but it's that exact thing that is so misunderstood. People don't know what high intensity means. People think that because something is exhausting and they are sweating and they're catching their breath in their Zumba, Pilates, whatsoever class, it is intense. But that does not mean intense, because the term intense from like this sport scientific point of view has like a very specific definition. So you, of course, like thinking intense means like an intense experience, like me being exhausted. And I understand that way of thinking, because also a lot of coaches don't understand that what that term really means. Because if you look at HIIT, like high intensity interval training on YouTube, or I don't know where, then you will find all sorts of trainings that are all not very intense. They are exhausting, yes, of course, right? Like I would die when I did like a Pilates class or a Zumba class. I'm not trying to talk that down or say it's not a good thing to do. It's a really nice thing to do. It has specific purposes, but when it comes to losing body fat efficiently, it's a different game, and that's just something that has to be considered. So all of these things that you'll find when you're looking for HIIT training is not actual HIIT training. What you're finding is all cardiovascular training. It's all in the slow fuel that we've talked about. And I'll talk more about what this high intensity really means. And that is you going to your maximum, you going to your limit, going all out. All right. So you're of course also going all out when you're doing like 200 burpees in a HIIT class. That's all also in a way all out. But what I'm talking about is that the amount of force that your body can produce in a given motion, like pushing, your legs pushing, your arms pushing, in simple terms, if you look at what could you do as a maximum, like let's imagine you having like a barbell, you're pressing it up, you're pressing up the barbell overhead, and the weight that you can use for one repetition, the maximum weight, let's say I can use 50 kilograms, that's my maximum, and I can push that overhead. Then I'm talking high intensity when I'm very close to that. When I use 5 kilograms and I do that 3,000 times, then I'm also, of course, also going all out in a way, and I'm exhausted, but it does not mean that it was intense. It was just exhausting. From like this sports scientific point of view, it's not intense. Intense it is when you're close to this maximum, which is 50 kilograms in my example. Say I can press 50 kilograms overhead. As soon as I'm very close to that weight, that's when something is intense. So what's important when we do interval training is that we use a device or a kind of activity that allows us to go to this maximum. Let's say, for example, an air bike, right? Maybe you've seen it in the gym. If you don't know, just Google it and you'll see it. You've probably seen it before. Or a watt bike. A watt bike is this kind of device that you're using also in the Peloton classes, right? It's a bit like this. It's a bit like these sprinting bikes, also that you can use on the streets where just your legs are moving. It's like a wattage bike. Something else would be like one of these rowing machines. Even though I don't like these very much, I don't recommend them. Or like for beginners, also a cross trainer, an elliptical. These would be devices that offer you enough resistance so that you can go all out. You can go close to your maximum because you can push a lot, right? You can push a lot and you can use like a very high intensity. But when you do sit-ups, the amount of force that you can generate with this exercise is limited because obviously you're only moving your upper body doing sit-ups and crunches. So you won't be able to access the high intensity because you're not close to the maximum force you can generate because the only motion you're doing is moving your upper body up and down. And it's going to be the same thing. It's a funny thing. Go ahead and check it, right? If you look on Google, YouTube, Instagram, TikTok for HIIT workouts, you will find all kinds of exercises where you see the same issue. The force is very limited and therefore you can't even access these high intensities anymore, right? Because the burpees, the jumping jacks, the push-ups, it's all your body weight and you won't go to your limit with that. So things like sprints, for example, things like watt bike, things like air bike, you can push and push more. With the sprint, it's also a body weight exercise, but you can push into the ground more and more. You can really use your limit here. As a result of that, you're going to run faster, obviously, right? So these are exercises that are not limited, and that's really important, using the right device that I already explained. The next thing that's really important if you want to keep at high intensity is resting enough, because obviously if you're accessing a high intensity, 80-90% of your maximum when pushing into the air bike, the watt bike, you're doing sprints and you're going all out, you won't be able to do that when you're resting just 30 seconds or 60 seconds or not at all. So the second thing you'll observe when you look for these HIIT classes on YouTube, Google, Instagram and so on is that they don't allow enough rest. They usually let you work out like for 1, 2, 3 minutes and then there's like maybe a 30-second, 60-second rest and then you go again. So it's not humanly possible, physiologically possible to do that, to do it in this way. And also if you're doing a set like an interval for 1 or 2 minutes, that just if you think about it like from a common sense without knowing any physiological background, from a common sense perspective, you won't be able to access high intensities because the high intensities with a fast fuel are obviously limited, right? So it's obviously limited how long you can pull from this glucose fuel, from this fast energy fuel, this anaerobic fuel. So you won't be able to go all out for like a minute. It's obviously not possible. So that's another big issue. You need enough rest time. You need the right device. You need to go to a high intensity. You need to go almost all out, right? And you need to rest enough to be able to sustain that from one interval to the next and so on. So if you're doing an interval training with 8-9 rounds, you of course need to keep the intensity high. Otherwise, the quality of the stimulus will be too low. The quality of the stimulus will be inefficient. It won't work for fat loss. It doesn't make any sense anymore. That's why like keeping the intensity high is important, and that only works with plenty rest. The next thing, you can't go all out. You can't use these high intensities for like an hour or something, right? For like with cardio, you won't be able to sustain that for like 20 rounds over like the course of 1 hour. And that's also a really nice thing about interval training, about HIIT training, actual HIIT training, is that your session will take you 20, 25, if you're more advanced, maybe 30 minutes. And that's it. Compared to cardio, it's not only more effective, long-term, more efficient, but also it just takes you way less time. So it's super easy to incorporate that into your day-to-day. So if you like post-work, right, you're just super busy, you're exhausted after your your full day of work, you were in the office for 8, 9, 10 hours, and you don't want to like do a full-blown 90-minute cardio session on the treadmill at the gym, then it's like the barrier of entry is lower if you know, hey, my session will take me 20 minutes if I go in there now. So I'm just dressing up for the gym real quick, 20 minutes, and I'm out again. So it's also on that end, it's way more sustainable to actually incorporate in your day-to-day. Now let's get into how this works in detail in practice, not only in theory. So we now talked about that rest is important, using the right device, and the high intensity is super important. Let's talk about one of the example programs that would be super beginner friendly. First thing, you have to use and choose a device. We want to stick with the same device from session to session. So what you can choose from, what I highly recommend, is a watt bike. Is one of those like bikes that look a bit like the racing bikes. An air bike, which would be even better, which is quite demanding also to use, right? The air bike, or if you're advanced, if you've been running over the last years every single week, if you've been out running, you can go out running if it's warm enough in your area. You can do hill sprints, or you can just use the treadmill in the gym, all right? So air bike, watt bike, or treadmill. Now, what we're starting off with an interval program of 10 rounds and 6 seconds. So one single interval will be 6 seconds. You're resting for 2 minutes, and you're doing 10 rounds of that, right? So this will be like 25 minutes in total. You do a warm-up round. You go like to 70% of your maximum with the air bike, right? Or with the watt bike, where you're only using the legs. And then you want to set up the display of the device. And most devices allow that, some don't, and then you can't really measure or track it, but then you're still going to progress. If possible, you check the display, you set up the rounds, you set up the amount of rounds with like X number of rounds, X time of rest that you're using, and then the display will walk you through it. Otherwise, you're using the timer on your phone to go through that. Meaning, you do a warm-up round, you're resting for 2 minutes, and then you're starting, right? You're going to almost your limit for 6 seconds only. It will just be a 6-second round. You're going all out with the watt bike or air bike. Then again, you're resting for 2 minutes, and then you're doing 10 rounds of that. And that's it. That's your training session. Something to consider is that you would want, especially in the beginning, to reach one maximum. You want to progress from set to set, so to say, from interval to interval, so that at some point you reach your maximum. And that's what you want to get better at in your next session. So in your next session, you want your maximum to be higher. Something else to consider is that you want the difference between the highest and the lowest set to not be that huge, right? So if your maximum set, in case the device allows you to track it, is 400 watt, then you want the lowest set to be just 350, not less than that, because otherwise the difference between the intensities is too high, and the quality of the stimulus will not be as good as if you're closer to that maximum, all right? So start off 350 watt, then 355, 360, and so on. You reach your maximum of 400, and then you can go down again. So you just reach that maximum in one single set, and in your next training session, talk about the frequency in a second, you want to increase. So you want to get a bit better at that maximum, so you want to increase that maximum a bit. That kind of training you can do once a week. You can also do twice a week. Or do it together with strength training, and it should take you like 25 minutes each. Use the following 2 options if you're a complete beginner and you feel just overwhelmed by the thought of going to the gym, going to the cardio section, or just like feels like way too much and feels like way too complicated. 2 options. Either you reduce the volume to 6 rounds of 6 seconds instead of 10. That's something you can do, and the session will just be 10 to 15 minutes, right? Super great way to start with when it's been a while since you've like last used your body and worked out, right? And the other thing is, you can do something completely different, which is using a different device, using the elliptical that I mentioned before a couple minutes. And that elliptical isn't as intense, right? The way the device is built you won't access these high intensities like with the other devices. Therefore, you should also increase the amount of time that one interval takes you a bit. So one interval should be like 20 seconds at least, and then you do 10 rounds of 20 seconds instead of 10 rounds of 6 seconds. But using an elliptical, like the cross trainer device, will also be a totally great way to start the journey with, especially also if you're coming from an injury, you're doing rehab. So that's definitely also an option. So to sum this whole episode up, you need less punishment and more efficiency. You don't need more working out, you need a better and smarter way of working out. So I'll cover the same topic of interval training, but also strength training and a food structure to increase your metabolism and lose fat in a more efficient way in these next episodes that I'm going to upload once a week in these next couple of weeks. So if you found it at least a bit valuable, make sure to follow the podcast, rate it, and also share it with a friend that you know this will help. Looking forward to seeing you in the next one.